Hello everyone, it's Fif and welcome to the channel. Today is the day. We are about to start this. Apparently, Caleb, what do you want to happen, buddy? Apparently, Ang said, what do we call Colleen Hoover? We call Colleen Hoover Coho, like her fans. That's what her fans call her. She's in a call, don't mind her. This is the famous, very famous everywhere. Book Talk, BookTube, wherever. Everybody's reading this. Everybody is crying over this book. And I've always steered clear of Colleen Hoover because like my expectations with her stories are like sad, really gut-wrenching, tear-jerking stories, and I'm not really the biggest fan, mostly because my emotions cannot take it. Like I'm all for the good time and the funny, fun, love VW stuff, but not the tear-jerking ones, which is why I rarely read sad books. I rarely pick up anything that will make me like cry, you know what I mean? My expectations here is it will just be so sad, I guess. I don't know, because I've been seeing people like talk about how much they cried in this book, and I'm like, that is not a fun time, bestie. Honestly, like I don't want to cry, but I do expect it to be great because a lot of people are talking about it. So we're starting today. I'm gonna take you with me as we read this book. Also, by the way, I didn't buy this. This is my sister's book. Like her friend gave it to her. Right? Who is your friend that gave it to you?
Hi, Hazel.
Hi, Hazel. Thank you for giving this to Ang. I will be reading it now. Like I have no excuse. It's love month. Let's be sad this love month with Colleen Hoover. Yeah, let's go.
I-hold mo lang siya without moving.
Pero bakit yung tsaka namin so? Pero calling Jim the truck. But look, something fell.
I got to a part that was genuine. That was a genuine wow. Oh my god. Ow. First check-in. I actually did 100 pages in my first day of reading, which was yesterday. Now it's Sunday. I'm in page 116 and I'm going to continue reading, but I just wanted to check in first 100 pages. Based on where I am now, I am already feeling kind of how heavy it is. Not in a sense that I'm not in the really heavy parts. I already understand why it can be heavy in a sense, because it tackles, this is not a spoiler, I think, it tackles a bit of domestic violence issues. Ugh, why is it? Sorry, I have to move you. Because the protagonist, Lily Bloom, has a really abusive father. So that is, I think, where it becomes really like deep and kind of dark. But I already came across something that I am not very fond of, and this is a personal preference thing because I know this is quite a popular trope, but it does have a love triangle trope. Yeah, I actually did not know this had a love triangle arc. Again, my fault, I didn't read the blurb at the back. Now I'm kind of not regretting that I'm reading this, but it's just that I really stray away from love triangles, especially if the triangle is a big part of the story, because there are stories, especially in fantasy books, where there are love triangles, but it's not the main point, I guess, of the story. But here we have Lily, the girl. Guy number 1 is Ryle. He's a neurosurgeon. And then there's another guy named Atlas, who is part of Lily's past. So there's a present guy and a past guy. And those two things are usually like the ones that create the most emotional damage, because you know, thank you dogs, but those are usually the most like jarring. Like somebody is bound to get hurt. Like you know somebody, I know somebody is going to get hurt, like end up getting hurt here. And I think I'm kind of liking one guy more than the other, which is still very early on. I'm just in page 100 out of 300 plus pages. So I'm gonna update you. I'm gonna keep reading today.
Shattered like broken glass, raining down around me. Feels like it's stabbing me now. The sharpness of each of his words coming at me like swords. You were laughing, and I'm so sorry it all happened so fast. I didn't mean to push you, Lily. I'm sorry. His eyes are full of genuine sorrow, but then they're full of something else. I don't care about my hand. Are you okay? He's looking back and forth between my eyes frantically as he assesses the cut on my face. Wraps his arm around my neck and desperately holds me against him. I'm so sorry, Lily. God, I'm so sorry.
We're seeing character shifts right now. I'm in shock. I'm in shock over what happened. I genuinely do not know what to think. I'm kind of shook. Like, I'm shook. Damn, I have to go to work. Hi. It has officially been a day and a half since I have finished the book with all my beautiful tabs and notes. Not really beautiful, kind of sad. I think the last clip I was filming myself was I was on the way to work and I was in a really like page turning part, and then I was just reading it and reading it and reading it and reading it during my lunch break, and I couldn't stop, and I finished it when I got home, and I just couldn't bring myself to film like reading it because it was a lot. Like it was a lot to process. Things didn't go the way I thought they would. I only have like pictures of myself crying in the office. These are just my thoughts after reading it and after kind of reflecting, and also at the same time looking through other people's reviews on this book. I've already mentioned it, but I'm mentioning it again. Trigger warning for this is domestic abuse. This book does tackle heavily on domestic abuse. It is the main point of the story. I personally did not know this going into the story, and I did word vomit on a Notion page. I apologize if I have to glance down a lot or read, because I feel like I didn't want to miss out on anything that I wanted to say initially in my head, so I'm just going to be reading a lot. A disclaimer to all my disclaimers. This video will be containing a lot of annoying disclaimers, especially in between sentences, because I feel like dealing with such a sensitive topic, I need to give it just so I don't get lost in translation or nothing is miscommunicated. Also because the internet is such a black hole of people who tend to kind of misunderstand certain sentences or misconstruct sentences and turn them into completely different things. So I just will give a lot of disclaimers for possibly every sentence I utter. I have never been in an abusive relationship, never experienced domestic abuse. I am a complete outsider reading this fictional book. Okay, so I can't seem to find it in me to rate this book yet, or maybe ever, because I read the author's note at the end of the book and it is based on real life situations. Colleen Hoover's backstory on this, why she wrote this book, it's about her mom. The book isn't a memoir of sorts, it's not. It's more of a based off or revolved around the story of her mother and her father. I find it difficult to kind of quantify that experience, because how do you rate or critique somebody's real life situations? I personally don't know how, but maybe I can critique it based on certain plot devices or how it was written and the writing styles, but I guess that's as far as I'm going to go. A quick blurb by myself, just to tell you what this book is about if you have not read it yet. It is about a girl named Lily Bloom who is currently living in Boston, but she's from a place called Plethora, Maine. So she moved to Boston to kind of get away from a dark past of hers, because her father was a very abusive man towards her mother. And in Boston, she finds kind of everything that she has been looking for, per se. So she finds her dream job. She opens her own flower shop because she loves gardening and she's always wanted to open up her dream flower shop. She finds wonderful friends, Alyssa and Marshall, who are big parts of her journey. And lastly, she finds a man who she ends up fancying and forming a relationship with. Everything seems to be going great in Boston for Lily Bloom. And in the course of her life in Boston, like, we see her setting up her dreams, we also see a different timeline where she travels back to her kind of dark past. Well, not kind of, really dark past, with her abusive dad, also with a boy named Atlas who she kind of helped. He was living in an abandoned house behind her house, and she started helping him, and they became really good friends, and he has a really special place in her heart. So they formed a really good friendship. We see those two timelines because we see Lily going through her journals when she was younger, specifically when she was 15. I personally didn't know how the story was gonna go and intertwine. My guess, which is the most predictable guess, is it would be a love triangle plot, and it would focus more on Ryle, which is the new guy, Lily, and maybe Atlas might resurface in the future. We never know. So let's go to the first 100 pages. These were my kind of initial feelings about the book. So number 1, Ryle charmed me. And when I was reading like Reddit threads and Goodreads threads, this was a very unpopular opinion because a lot of people automatically or right off the bat did not like Ryle, because Ryle is a neurosurgeon who is a very ambitious and driven person. He is, I think, God, did they mention Ryle's age? Because Lily at present day was 23, if I'm not mistaken. Ryle is probably about either his late 20s or his early 30s. So he's really like man. And I felt how mature, like as much as men can be mature, he was, especially the way he and Lily first met. They met on a rooftop. Ryle was having a really bad day and Lily was also having a bad day, and they started spewing like naked truth. So this is a big theme in the book, like naked truths, where Ryle and Lily would tell each other really raw thoughts of theirs that they have. It was such a good device to use to characterize Ryle and Lily, which I personally think was the whole characterization of Ryle and Lily. It was driven through the naked truths that they were spewing at each other, and I think that's how they kind of started fancying each other or developing feelings for each other. But one of the big opinions I've been seeing online was a lot of people did not like Ryle off the bat. They found him to be annoying and a bit braggy and douchey and assholey, but I I personally, and maybe there's a red flag on my part, I don't know, was charmed by this man. Like, I was getting kilig over everything he was doing, all the things he was saying, and I think a huge part of this is because he's a man compared to when we flash back to the Atlas arc in the journals. We are introduced to Atlas, Lily's old or like first love, through Lily's journals, and in those journals Atlas was 18 years old. So I feel like I rooted for Ryle in the first 100 pages because he was the older dude. I'm not into immature. Well, not saying Atlas was immature, but of course I was only seeing the teen side of him. So I really was not attracted to that anymore. Also, I just feel like I have to mention this, but I was really attracted to how competent Ryle was as a neurosurgeon and how driven he was with his career. I like career-driven men, apparently. So for me, I guess there wasn't really room to compare the two men in the first 100 pages because we were seeing present Ryle and past Atlas. There's also I saw a lot of critiques surrounding Lily falling for Ryle so quickly. For those people who kind of think like that, you're obviously not a hopeless romantic, and that's fine. Like, that's super fine. I personally am a hopeless romantic. I don't want to criticize somebody's timeline for falling in love with a person because I know like it does happen, like love at first sight, or like maybe you're on a date for a few days and you're already in love. Like, that happens. Like, I cannot, like, it happens. Another thing in the first 100 pages that kind of put me a bit off were the Ellen diaries. Lily would write in her diary when she was 15, so this is how we kind of find out about Atlas and her past. She wrote them to a person. Like, there was a specific person she was writing to, and it was because this is a celebrity that she like often watched to make her feel better, a person that made her laugh, and it was Ellen DeGeneres. She wrote about her traumatic past to Ellen DeGeneres. And I don't know, all the Ellen references put me off. Like, it was like the content of the letters were fine, but writing to Ellen DeGeneres, it was just weird. I personally didn't have much thoughts, honestly, on her and Atlas. Like, reading the journals when she was reminiscing her time, I was more fixated on the story of her and her abusive father and her mother who was being abused. So I was also kind of uncomfortable with the age gap between Atlas and Lily. I am aware that he was 18 and she was 15 turning 16, I guess. Well, he is of age and she wasn't of age. It made me uncomfortable because at 15 I was very immature. I just couldn't see myself in that situation at 15. So I don't know. Do with that what you will. Midway onwards, this is where like things started turning and I found out how this was not actually what I thought it was. But before I mention those things, I really do love Alyssa and Marshall. These are friends of Lily's that she met at the first part of the book, and she has grown to have relationships with these people. They were really good friends of hers, especially Alyssa, which turned out to be her best friend in the end. I really love them. They were such fun characters to have around, especially given that this is a sad book. But midway, it was a complete 360. I realized that this book was more of a women's / adult fiction than it is a romance. It raised a big, I guess, red flag for me in the way it was advertised, because I always thought this was going to be a story about romantic heartbreak, like something that is sad but revolves around romance, but it's not. The latter half of the book, we see more of the issue on domestic abuse, and it really made me reflect on men and women in domestic abuse situations. Not just those who are abused, which of course are the most important people to be thinking about, but also the context of abusers. Why do they abuse? What happened in their past that would have made them do such things? Their mental health, their personalities, what kind of people they are versus the things that they do, and like how these coexist in one person. This is what I've been telling my friends who have been asking me how the book is. I see it as an encyclopedia of red flags, specifically those that are disguised in minute details or often romanticized situations like jealousy, aggression, rare but sudden anger episodes in between perfectly normal days. The details we don't often perceive because there are are objectively bigger red flags that we sometimes worry about more than these small things. This was, I would say, an encyclopedia of those details to look out for in a relationship. I honestly can't say much more about the latter half of the book without spoiling it, so I will say, before I conclude the non-spoilers part, it is definitely a book you cannot put down. For me, it's the type that I have to get it over with, rip the band-aid, and just mull over it after, because it's really heavy to process slowly. Like, I feel like I would have been more sad if I took this really slow, but at the same time, if you're the type of person who can't take things all at once, I would recommend taking it in increments, or take it really slow, and just, if it's too much, put it down and pick it back up again 3 months after you think you're okay again. For me personally, I just couldn't stop reading because at the first part of the book, it made me expect so many things that did not come in the second half. So in my brain, like, the predictability of it just went down. So I wanted to already address what was going to happen and find out how things or the story would go. I didn't agree with everything about the book, but I do understand the message it's trying to give. Like, I do understand the message that Colleen Hoover is trying to kind of embed within the story, because it's not, again, per se the exact story of her mom, but it did derive from that context or that narrative. So from this point onward, I will be giving spoilers. I'll be putting a with spoilers chapter below, so if you don't want spoilers, you can just skip this chapter and go to the next chapter. Okay, my first point here, I'm just gonna go through this with the bullets I wrote in my notes, and this might not make any sense, but this is essentially a video about me word vomiting about this book, so doesn't matter. My first bullet, I said here, Ryle was too good to be true. I literally wrote, like, I have an annotation. I should have known a man named Ryle would be suspicious. A while ago, I said that Ryle gave me the feels. I actually did fall in love with him as a person, which is why I think when page 185 arrived, it hit me so hard. Like, I was so affected. Like, if I were Lily, I was, like, right with her when she fell in love with him. I was riding that honeymoon phase. I was riding the high. And again, this is a disclaimer, my feelings. If you hated him, that's completely fine. If you saw red flags right from the beginning, again, completely fine. But I personally didn't. And honestly, when I was beginning to see that this is a story of domestic abuse, I genuinely thought we would be reminiscing the situation of Lily's parents and her living her life as a traumatized child, or like her bringing her anxiety, that kind of traumatic anxiety, to her relationships. But never for the life of me did I think that she would also be in a domestic abuse situation, given that she was traumatized by the domestic abuse of her parents. At this page, at page 185, I was hoping for all the, like, redemption arcs. Like, this cannot be real. Like, this, like, I was so in love with Ryle and Lily, like the both of them together. I was so in love because Lily didn't mind that he was a career-driven person and that he was really busy being a neurosurgeon, because she also had dreams of her own. And then there was this one line that Ryle told Lily at the beginning of the book that is one of my favorite lines of his. I think this was when they first met and they were about to part ways and they thought they would never see each other again. "It was nice meeting you, Lily Bloom. I hope you defy the odds of most dreams and actually accomplish yours." So that camaraderie when it came to dreams or like their ambitions and goals in life, I really felt between them. I think also because that's the type of man I am looking for, or the quality of a partner I'm looking for. One who will really support my dreams and, you know, is also career driven as well, that we would be in the same wavelength when it comes to chasing whatever it is that we want to achieve. So I was really, really affected and in denial. It was not hard for me to put myself into Lily's shoes when she was in that phase where she was trying to justify or reason, which is something that we will talk about further, but reason with why she shouldn't leave the relationship because she was in love. Yeah, so I was heartbroken. But let's talk about Lily as a main character. I don't know the general consensus about Lily, but I personally liked her. I didn't like her all of the time, but overall, in general, I do like her. I really do admire her as a person and as a main character. Her situation kind of made me realize or become aware of what it could possibly be like for a person who was already traumatized by a situation and spends her whole life trying to avoid the same situation to happen to her, but it ends up landing on her lap eventually. I just want to go through a couple of paragraphs that she mentioned in page 242. But if I'm emulating my mother's behavior, then that would mean Ryle is emulating my father's behavior. But he isn't. I have to stop comparing us to them. We're our own individuals in an entirely different situation. My father never had an excuse for his anger, nor was he immediately apologetic. The way he treated my mother was much worse than what's happened between me and Ryle. Yes, he screwed up last night, but he's here and he's trying to make me understand his past and why he reacted the way he did. Humans aren't perfect, and I can't let the only example I've ever witnessed of marriage weigh in on my own marriage. She was up there confused about the whole situation, and I was there with her. When she was saying all of these things, I was nodding along with her. I don't know, I felt like there was understanding between the two of us because I learned to love Ryle. She loved Ryle. I think she was trying, what I was seeing here and I was understanding was she was trying to grapple with the situation because she didn't want to cage her situation into an example or a mirror or parallel of her parents' situation. And she was also trying to get out of that traumatic mindset that she has because she was scared that she was projecting her parents' situation to her and Ryle's. I was writing it with her and I was feeling a lot for her, which made me attached to her as a person. I like her because she wasn't perfect. We saw how she grappled with her love for Ryle and her need to leave him. She was a real person and not some idealized woke MC who might have left at the first push. Not that it's wrong to leave at the first push, but she was in love, plain and simple. Next point, and this is a plot hole I'm currently living in right now, and I still don't have the answers to all of my questions about this, but this is just one of the glaring and gaping issues, I guess, that I personally saw in the book. We were introduced to a story arc where we see the context of Ryle's traumatic background, possibly leading to his abusive episodes. We see an attempt to humanize him, and I say attempt because this attempt was never explored any further. So in the first half of the book, especially if you were also drawn in like me, we see his naked truths with Lily, how vulnerable he is as a person, how driven he is as a neurosurgeon, how good he is to his sister and to his family, how he fell in love with Lily, and the things he saw with Lily that also made me fall in love with Lily. Like, Ryle was a big factor as to why I also loved Lily Bloom. If we were already exploring attempts to humanize him, why was there no redemption arc for Ryle? I'm not saying he should have a happily ever after, which is kind of what happened in the end, but he was not offered any form of help. We never saw if his peers proactively engaged in trying to help him, so we were kind of seeing Alyssa being sus. The first time Lily and Ryle came out with a relationship, she was really worried. At the end of the book, when she finds out that Ryle was abusing Lily, she was like, I would get mad at you if you take him back. And for me, that was a big red flag on her part, even if I love her, because aren't there any proactive steps in trying to help your brother? Or in Lily's part, there were so many times where Ryle mentioned or was asking for her help. Like he mentioned multiple times where he said, Lily, please help me. And like in my head, I was like, why is nobody, like, maybe Lily can be sort of excused, if I can say, maybe not, because she also has her own traumas to deal with, but Ryle's sister, Ryle's brother-in-law, Marshall, who I guess, is aware of the situation. Ryle's parents. Like, why is nobody proactively trying to seek help for him, especially since he said he hasn't been to therapy since he was 6 and he's a neurosurgeon? If he was like actively trying to seek help, we didn't see it in the book. Like, it was never mentioned. It was very specifically mentioned that he blacked out. He had some blackout episodes. There was this one inner dialogue of Lily where she said in page 320, I wonder what that must be like, to have no idea what might set you off or how bad your reaction will be, to have absolutely no control over your own emotions. If everybody was aware that this man was like had episodes where he had no control over his own emotions and his own actions and he blacked out, this is a very pressing concern. And in the end, Lily kind of reconciled with him, and I was sobbing so hard in that hospital scene where she gave birth and she told him she was going to divorce him, and they were going through all like the stuff like, what would you tell your daughter, blah, 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 blah. I was sobbing. But at the same time, there was this lingering thought in my head that was like, why are you not getting any help for this man? He is obviously showing signs of wanting to change and wanting to be there for his daughter. I would assume, and this is just an assumption, he would be open to seeking psychiatric help just to be safe around his daughter. One of the main points that I think from how Colleen Hoover was painting Ryle was he was very different from Lily's father because he was showing active signs of wanting to change. It was also really emphasized that people are not innately good and bad, they just do good and bad things. So yeah, this is me assuming that Ryle is a good person that has abusive tendencies and he needed to seek help before he was even allowed to carry his infant child. I don't know what else to say about that issue. Like, I was just confused. On in Lily's end, it was concluded, I guess, enough. She was given a good arc, good development. She ends up with Atlas. But for Ryle, like, for you to paint him that way but to leave him hanging, I think that's what I feel with his characterization. Like, you painted him a certain way. I ended up liking him. I did. If you didn't, then there's no problem. But then you left him hanging in the air. Like, he's literally dangling from a thread, not knowing where to go. Because his abusive tendencies are not going to just disappear overnight. Which I guess is, I think, why people end up really hating Ryle, like he is the scum of the earth, and not understanding why other people could possibly empathize with such a man, because he is an abuser, and I kind of get that. But at the same time, there are also the other side of the spectrum of readers where we feel like the author did him dirty and it was just really written badly. So it becomes kind of a black and white situation, which isn't. As much as we would like to paint Ryle as just the abuser, he is much more complex than that, which I think one of the nuanced ideas that was introduced in the book that I personally appreciated that was addressed. But moving on from Ryle, I feel like I've been saying too much about Ryle. Don't get me wrong though, like, I honestly swear to God think that they should have divorced. Like, it was good that they were divorced. He did not deserve Lily at the end. But I just think that if we're already in the path where we're addressing possible contexts as to why abusers do abuse, then let's go all the way. Let's move on to Atlas, because I don't have much to say about him. I personally think he was a plot device. I appreciated him more as a man. He was okay as a boy too. Like, he was such a sweet 18-year-old, but the age gap really did bother me, I think, so which is why I didn't really have much thoughts on him. He was sweet and I liked him for Lily, but again, no thoughts. I did kind of see more of his context though through the author's note, because Colleen did mention that she has a stepdad who she loves very much and who walked her down the aisle rather than her real biological father. So I guess Atlas is a representation of her stepdad, which is great. But again, not really much thoughts because I really was focused more on what I previously discussed. I'm done with the spoilers. I'm gonna try to say this chapter in a way that is not spoiling anybody. Before I go into it, I think I have to mention that I am aware that this book is not all encompassing. I feel like every time I mention that I learned something from a book or from a movie or anything that I consume, I have to mention or put a disclaimer that I am aware that this situation or this story does not encompass the entire gravity or all angles of the situation that it chooses to kind of talk about. I am aware that there are other people dealing with also domestic abuse that will kind of sort of be in a similar situation but address it entirely differently. I know that because somebody from the internet will always pipe up and say, but it wasn't like that for other women or other men. It wasn't like that for me. Yes, I'm aware. I'm completely aware that there are many angles and many different possible outcomes to a situation. I am just merely talking about the lessons that I learned in this book, in this situation. Lesson number 1, abusive relationships are not black and white. This was one of the things that was, I think, very maturely tackled in the book. It's easy to have a get up and leave perspective or rule when you're an outsider to a abusive relationship if you're looking at things in an outward perspective. And I hear this a lot from people my age, Gen Z, millennials, who always have this mindset that if something bad happens in the relationship, whether it's cheating, abusing, lying, whatever unfortunate circumstance it is the first time it happens, it's a red flag. You get up and leave. And it is a very idealistic rule to have or kind of perspective to have, and in the ideal world, I guess, yeah. And I want to read a few excerpts from the book about this. Page 246. Sometimes the girl inside me, the daughter of my father, is really opinionated. She tells me I shouldn't have forgiven him. She tells me I should have left the first time. And sometimes I believe that voice. But then the side of me that knows Ryle understands that marriage isn't perfect. Sometimes there are moments that both parties regret, and I wonder how I'd feel about myself had I just left him after that first incident. He never should have pushed me, but I also did things I wasn't proud of. And if I'd have just left, would that not be going against our marriage vows, for better or for worse? I refuse to give up on my marriage that easily. I think as a 24-year-old and almost going through that quarter life portion of my life, things really change in perspective for me, especially when it comes to relationships, especially when it comes to unfortunate situations where you thought it would be easy to drop people, it would be easy to let go of things that hurt you. In this context, especially in the context of marriage, you did spend a lot of time loving this person, and then 15 seconds of both of your lives suddenly tainted. Like, it's very difficult to just get up and leave. I stare back at him and I think about how easy it is for humans to make judgments when we're standing on the outside of a situation. I spent years judging my mother's situation. It's easy when we're on the outside to believe that we would walk away without a second thought if a person mistreated us. It's easy to say we couldn't continue to love someone who mistreats us when we aren't the ones feeling the love of that person. When you experience it firsthand, it isn't so easy to hate the person who mistreats you when most of the time they're your godsend. This realization, I think, also makes that scene between Lily and her mother more cathartic because they discuss importance of limits. We all have a limit, what we're willing to put up with before we break. When I married your father, I knew exactly what my limit was. But slowly, with every incident, my limit was pushed a little more and a little more. The first time your father hit me, he was immediately sorry. He swore it would never happen again. The second time he hit me, he was even more sorry. The third time it happened, it was more than a hit. It was a beating. And every single time I took him back. But the fourth time, it was only a slap. And when that happened, I felt relieved. I remember thinking, at least he didn't beat me this time. This wasn't so bad. I think that was such an important lesson to give personally to me, and made me aware of things like this that I was not aware of. People spend so much time wondering why women don't leave. Where are all the people who wonder why the men are even abusive? Isn't that where the only blame should be placed? I think this is such an important thing to mention because it opens the conversation on how we can possibly improve our approach on domestic abuses cases where, number one, we listen to the abusers. We don't question why they stayed or why they even came back. And it also opens conversation to address why the abuser can possibly be the way that he is, whether it's through mental illness, childhood trauma. And this is not to excuse the abuser's actions at all. No, an abuse is abuse. Like, it was a crime. We are simply opening again the conversation in trying to understand why he could have possibly turned out the way he is. Because people can be good and bad. And this is a nuance that I would like to see more in books and stories that should be addressed. I'll talk about the writing real quick because I think this is where I can be objective and kind of quantify my critique in a way. This is my first Colleen Hoover book, so I do know her as a romance author. It was very simplistic writing, which I honestly don't mind, but I know other people can be anal about this. So it's the spoon-feedy type, kind of cliche, kind of predictable. But I didn't mind. I hated the Ellen references. And one thing that I did kind of find weird is the diary entries were written in a way that was very narrative. Like, there was dialogue, there were quotation marks. And I don't know if anybody writes like this, or maybe it's just because I don't write in my diary like this. I write like, "Dear diary, this happened today." This one was just so detailed. I guess it was to show really like the depth of her history. It just didn't feel like a diary entry. So I'm thinking maybe it could have just been through forms of flashbacks where we went back to her old timeline and not through a diary entry, because every time I read a diary entry, I'd be like, really? Did this 15-year-old really remember each and every second of the day? There's so much more to unpack with this. I do hope that this could be advertised more as a women's or adult fiction rather than a romance, because it would really send a different message. I think that's why a lot of people also did not like it, because they were expecting something like sexy or romantic or fluffy, but this was just not it. Like, it was not. I'm grateful enough for TikTok for saying that this was a really heavy thing. But yeah, I just wish that this could be advertised differently so that the audience would have an idea on how to have a perspective on it. That's it. I don't know how long this video is gonna be, but hopefully I kind of made sense. I personally think Colleen Hoover and her mother were very, very generous to have us even take a glimpse of their experiences and how they lived their lives. So that's intense bravery, and I appreciate her sharing this with us because I learned a lot. Like, I definitely did learn a lot from this. I'm willing to discuss more about it in the comments nicely if anybody wants to bring up points that I missed or bring up points that I misinterpreted. I don't know. I feel like there's so much more to say, but I just will, like, whatever. Good night, good morning, good afternoon. If you read this, giving you a pat on the back and hugging you from where I am. Keep safe. Keep sane. Wear your masks. Goodbye.